Hi, and welcome to our next webinar in our Environmental Justice series hosted by the National Park Service Connected Conservation Community of Practice. My name is Cass Bismeyer, and I'm the lead for that community. Our work is focused on landscape scale conservation, so conservation that crosses boundaries and borders. And we've been in the midst of this great series. It's a 10-part series focused on environmental justice. We kicked off our series back in February, hearing from the Department of the Interior and their work around environmental justice, forthcoming policies. They have a large symposium that's taking place next week for the Department of the Interior employees. And so we're looking forward to continuing some of the dialogue there as well. As a part of that series, we also heard from Reggie Chappell, who is one of our leaders for the National Park Service, Assistant Director for the Partnerships and Civic Engagement Directorate. And he kind of laid the stage for what environmental justice means for the National Park Service and where we're heading in this arena. As a part of this series, we've also heard from some important partners and sister agencies. The EPA gave us an overview on EJ Screen. We also heard from NASA on their NASA Develop program and opportunities there for grants with environmental justice and conservation. We also heard from a few park programs and what our social scientists and economists are doing, and a few programs that are using environmental justice layers to prioritize their work and really make a difference here, move the needle on how this all interfaces with what the National Park Service does and what conservation organizations do. Just a little housekeeping before we get started and I introduce our panelists here. We are using GoToWebinar today. If you have any questions, feel free to use that question box. We will host a Q&A panel session at the very end of the presentation today. So as you have the questions, feel free to just drop them in the box and we'll collect them and make sure that we hit each question if we have time. If we run out of time, we will follow up with the panelists and make sure that you have a chance to hear from them directly on the question that you're specifically asking about. And then we do record all of our webinars and we'll post them on our internal Connected Conservation Toolkit. I'll drop a link to that here in a second in the chat as well. And then we'll also post it on our external site, just nps.gov/connected conservation, where you can also register for all of our series that's forthcoming and see all the recordings as well. And so without further ado, we're really pleased today to have a panel of National Park Service staff who represent different parks and their role on environmental justice. Today we have Rebecca Colwell, Chief of Natural and Cultural Resources from Acadia National Park. We also have Bill Clayton, who's an archaeologist at Grand Portage, and he's going to talk about co-management. And then we have Teri Gage, who's a superintendent at Pullman National Monument, and she's going to talk about how they've gotten started and what they've been doing with environmental justice. We also have a dear colleague of mine, Rebecca Stanfield-McCown from the Stewardship Institute, who's very involved in a lot of work in environmental justice, as well as with the Network for Landscape Conservation, which is a nonprofit organization that helps pull a lot of these conservation organizations together around landscape scale conservation. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca first to kind of kick us off, and then we'll run through our presentations. Last reminder, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in chat. Thanks so much. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thanks, Cass, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to share this panel with you and to hear the good work that's happening on the ground. We're going to get an opportunity to learn some of the promising practices that are coming out of the experiences of our fellow colleagues and their work with communities, from getting started to long-term co-management plans to really looking at how we engage traditional ecological knowledge as part of our management. So we're really going to get to see the people's side of environmental justice and what it means to build those strong, sustainable relationships that allow us to make really, really impactful work in communities. So I encourage you to, be looking for things that are relevant to your work, approaches, sayings that you're hearing that you're like, oh, that really resonates with me. Pop those questions into the chat about how folks are thinking about success, what challenges they're facing and how they're overcoming those. The best way that we're going to learn from these experiences is to really share what we're learning and how we're stepping into these communities as best we can. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Teri to talk to us about Pullman and what's happening on the ground there.
Thanks, Rebecca. Excuse me, and good afternoon, everyone. You know, when Rebecca first asked me about serving on this panel, I was kind of hesitant because Pullman is such a new park. We just opened our new visitor center last fall, and we're really just getting started on this environmental justice work, really more in the planning mode. But we the work that we're planning is really pretty exciting and gaining momentum every day. And if you're interested in environmental justice work in the National Park Service, I do believe that Pullman is going to be a park that you're going to want to keep your eye on. So to give you just a little bit of context, Pullman National Monument is just a cool little historic neighborhood. About a 200-acre oasis, if you will, in far South Chicago. And far South Chicago is a predominantly African-American community where people are dealing with a lot of serious issues like social injustice, poverty, food deserts, addiction, gang warfare, gun violence. These are things that they're dealing with on a daily basis. And you can tell people are, fairly stressed and traumatized from dealing with this on a daily basis. And environmental injustice is just another fact of life for them. People who live here are surrounded by brownfields and Superfund sites, landfills, wastewater treatment plants. And in fact, the reason that the National Park Service only owns one small building here at Pullman, and I guess I shouldn't call it a small building. Relatively, it's small, but it's 3 floors with 10,000 square feet on each floor. But that is the only building that the Park Service owns, and that's because the real estate or the land surrounding the building was contaminated. And the state of Illinois owned that property. They've spent over $30 million redeveloping the grounds and remediating the soil contamination, but it still doesn't meet the NPS standard for no impairment. So the Park Service will likely never acquire that property. So this is something that is very real to the people in this part of the city of Chicago. It affects their health, it affects their life expectancy, property values, and just overall quality of life. And climate change is just going to make all of this worse. So last year, when we learned that the National Park Service was developing a new interpretive toolkit, it's called History and Hope, Interpreting the Roots of Our Climate Crisis, I knew that this was something that we really needed to get involved with. And so taking inspiration from the work being done on the toolkit, as well as some of the environmental justice work being done by Groundwork USA, I developed a grant proposal for a youth engagement program centered around environmental justice, climate change action, and civic engagement in the urban planning process. And just so you understand, urban planning is a primary interpretive theme here at Pullman. And this grant application was funded almost immediately by the National Park Foundation, and we will be launching it as an after-school program starting this fall. And interestingly enough, the after-school program is going to run concurrently with the park's general management plan, as well as other local planning efforts related to public transportation, streetscape improvement, and economic development here in the community. And so the young people in this program will serve as a focus group for these various planning efforts and gain hands-on experience in civic engagement and learn how to be proactive and effective in creating the change that is needed in their community and developing the leadership and communication skills that this next generation is going to need in order to address important issues like climate change and injustice. So we are pretty excited about this project, even though, we haven't quite launched it yet. But we are really excited about the potential and already talking about possible next steps and the what-if possibility of working with community partners to establish a groundwork trust here in South Chicago, kind of as a natural outgrowth of the youth engagement program. And if you're not familiar with Groundwork USA, I would say just Google it, and you will quickly understand why it seems to be a good fit here in Pullman and in South Chicago. But even though, as much potential as this has, and as excited as we are about this, what I keep emphasizing with our team and with our partners and with National Park Foundation is that a one-year grant is not sufficient. It's better than doing nothing, right? But it's not enough. In order to be truly effective, this needs to be a long-term commitment with a sustainable funding source. And we need to keep working on this for probably at least the next 10 years in order to make a real difference. And we certainly can't do it alone, and we shouldn't be doing it alone. We need to be leveraging the resources of our community partners and working with schools and city government and our neighbors to create lasting, sustainable change that is truly needed here. And perhaps the most challenging aspect of all is, how do you get people to engage in things like climate change or historic preservation when you know that they're worried about not having enough food to put the next meal on the table, or worried about, the real safety risk of just getting to school and to work and home and back, with all of the gun violence that is happening in this part of Chicago. It's a real challenge, and it requires me and my team to stay continually and actively engaged with the local police department, with schools, and a whole host of nonprofit organizations in the community, building a strong network of resources for our shared constituents. And this is something that I learned from the NPS Urban Agenda information, which you can find online, is that in order for urban parks like Pullman to be successful in reaching these underserved audiences and to be relevant with those audiences, the park has to understand the needs of the community and collaborate with community organizations and work really hard to align our park programming to meet those needs and achieve the mission of the agency. It is no easy task. We clearly have our work cut out for us, but I am hopeful that if we were to reconvene this conversation a year from now, we will have some very positive results and undoubtedly some valuable lessons learned that we will be able to share with you all then. And that is all from Pullman.
Thanks so much, Teri. And we're just going to drop a few of those links in the chat. Teri, that toolkit that you mentioned, is there a link to that quite yet, or has that been released?
It hasn't been quite released yet.
Okay.
Soon though.
Yeah, excellent. We'll look forward to watching for that, and we'll certainly promote it through our connected conservation efforts too. It sounds really remarkable. Okay, we're going to switch gears now, and we're going to head over to Bill. Bill, you're going to see that presenter right little button pop up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. And just a reminder, folks, while he's getting this plugged in, feel free to drop questions in the chat as you have them, and we'll address those when we get to that Q&A panel session.
All right. Can you see that?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
There we go. That looks good. And then if you want to just go up to that little display settings at the top there of your screen.
Yep.
There you go. And click on the bottom one, and then it should go full screen for us. Duplicate slideshow. Oh, and now we just need to go back to that little podium at the bottom. There we go. Yep, looks good. Thanks, Bill.
All right, yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about our Grand Portage National Monument, which is a, I won't say very unique co-management or tribally co-managed park, because there are other parks in the service that are starting to go this route or are already there. Another one kind of getting into the same level of co-management that we are to be River Raisin in Michigan. But yeah, we're going to just kind of go through this. I'm just going to overview the park a little bit. Sorry to subject you to a PowerPoint, but it's best to just kind of show some photos and some maps to give you an idea of where we are and what our situation is here with the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior and Anishinaabe people. If you can see the screen here, this is just kind of a small scale view of the park. We're located in northeastern Minnesota, just off the Canadian border. We're sandwiched in between two big wilderness areas, Royal National Park and the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, Superior National Forest, and we share the lake with many other parks, including Fossil Islands National Lake Shore. You can see the map there. We've got, it shows the outline of the Grand Portage Reservation, and then that sort of little yellow stripe in there, east-west trending. That's the park itself. Just kind of this is our Heritage Center. It was finished, completed, and opened in 2007. So we've been before that, we had our visitors. We actually had our staff was about 34 miles south of the park itself and the reservation in the town of Grand Marais. So since 2007, we've been up here actually in the reservation, and lots of staff have moved up here and are living here now. And visitor center is kind of part of the reservation, tourist visitor centers. There's also a state park here as well, and a casino. Just another little better view of the park. It's east-west trending. Very narrow park, goes right through the reservation, goes from the Lake Superior Highlands all the way up into the upper country, over to the west. Overview, we're about a 710 acre park, and the whole park is kind of developed around this 8.5 mile portage trail that gets people from Lake Superior up into the river and lake systems of what they used to call the upper country and into middle into central Canada. I use the word ancient there just to give the idea that there's lots of archaeology and historic and definitely oral history data that points to a very ancient age to that, or ancient time period that this trail has been used. We are located again in the 50-some thousand acre Grand Portage Reservation. We were established in 1958 with a very broad mandate to preserve basically unique historic values in the area of Grand Portage. Again, our time period goes back to about 9,000 years ago and right up to the present with the about last century of Grand Portage, the existence of Grand Portage Reservation Village. We're co-managed under both our enabling legislation and established again in 1958 and the 1994 Tribal Self-Governance Act. I doubled up on that one statement there. Kind of just a basic overview of some of the resources we have. Lots of archaeology up here, dating back again thousands of years before contact with Europeans. We do have a heavy archaeological presence of European fur trade activities here. And we have quite even more sizable archaeological presence of the original Grand Portage village that's inside the park boundary, the first reservation village. As far as natural resources, it's all southern boreal up here. Lots of ancient geology, Precambrian, and Pleistocene geology. Just kind of going over just a few of the projects. There's a lot, obviously, as all parks are, where there's a lot going on here right now. But I cherry-picked a few out that are really expressing, the idea of environmental justice. First and foremost, our annual funding agreement, which is set up under the Tribal Self-Governance Act, allows both us and Isle Royale National Park, which is within the historic homeland of the Grand Portage Ojibwa, allows us to pass project funding, a lot of maintenance, a lot of natural resource and interpretation funding to the band so that they can manage it and take ownership of it and help us manage it and get non-recurring projects completed. We also have been trying, I'd say for the last 5 years, we've been working at setting up conservation crew that do provide jobs for Grand Portage youth, and also, so basically conservation, cultural resource, natural resource, a lot of trail work. We're moving into food sovereignty and helping the tribal agriculture program with their gardening. But basically it provides jobs and also kind of direction and allows Grand Portage youth to test the waters of the waters for potential careers in these fields. Another long-term and ongoing project we've had since I've been here about 11 years ago is we do manage for sweetgrass. We have a genetically unique sweetgrass, unique, or I should say geographically unique sweetgrass that grows here, and we've been actually growing it in the area where the historic village Archeology is, where the village was, in order for tribal elders and student groups and anybody in the community to come and collect sweetgrass, and we just sort of leave them in there, let them in there, and we let them in there, and so they can kind of have a moment to themselves to do it. And we also manage the management side of this, is we do burn this field pretty much once every 2 years or 3 years or so, keep down any kind of competition for the sweetgrass, and we're constantly monitoring it. Another thing that we do help out with under our enabling legislation, it's a section in there that allows us to help with technical assistance. So we provide a lot of Section 106, Section 106 review for Grand Portage the Grand Portage Tribal Timber Program, and do a lot of consultation on cultural resource issues for the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Tribal Council on things going on outside the reservation, cultural impacts to cultural resources that may happen outside the reservation from other agencies or communities. Just some photos of sort of the park and some of the things we do. This is do a lot of site evaluation and cultural resource work. This is a particular salvage evaluation we did on Lake Superior Shore a couple years ago. Went on for a few years. Lots of volunteers, youth, a lot of people get involved in these. And this is the Grand Portage Conservation Crew a couple years back working on some trail work within the park. We've got a couple of smaller trails beyond the Portage, and there's just constant work to be done. And that's about 10 minutes for me, and appreciate being able to talk a little bit about the park.
Thanks so much, Bill. And we're going to head to our last presentation here. And again, folks, if you have questions, feel free to plug those in the chat. And Rebecca, you should have just been prompted with to share your screen. Great. And then if you just want to go full screen in that bottom corner, I will say too, just before Rebecca gets started here, she does have a couple of videos that we're going to try to show through the presentation. I'll also drop links to the videos in the chat simultaneously. So if you're having any kind of audio issues, or if your internet is not stable, feel free to just open those links in the chat and you can watch them simultaneously while they're showing on the screen as well. Okay.
I'm sorry, where's the full screen button again?
It's that little podium just to the right
Okay.
of where you are.
Oh.
Yep, there it
Okay.
is.
Here we are. Is this working? And then I go to display settings and.
You got it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being in. And Bill, you're doing all the things that we hope and wish and that we'll be able to do here at Acadia eventually. So thank you for really, that was very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about some work we're doing here around Wabanaki plant gathering, and it's focusing on sweetgrass harvesting and the development of protocols and relationship here. And before I get started with that, I wanted to situate you where you are. We are at Acadia National Park, which is, right in the mid-coast of Maine, with parts of MDI and the Scoodic Peninsula and Isle of Ho. But there are 3 other Park Service units in Maine as well. St. Croix Island International Historic Site in far eastern Maine, Katahdin Woods and Waters, which is a fairly new national monument in northern Maine, and then of course the Appalachian Trail also runs through Maine. And these are places, of course, and spaces that are Wabanaki homeland, and I wanted to show you where the communities are today. There are 4 federally recognized tribes or nations in Maine with 5 communities. So in Presque Isle, the Mi'kmaq Nation, and Holton is the Holton Band of Maliseets, and at what is called Indian Township in Pleasant Point. And I'm not going to pronounce the Passamaquoddy names because I will not do it correctly, but Zibayak and Matokmaguk are the 2 Passamaquoddy communities in eastern Maine, and then Benawabskeg or Indian Island is the Penobscot Nation homeland today. But of course, these are all of this landscape is from southern Labrador to Massachusetts to west to all the way to Lake Champlain, and are all Wabanaki homeland and all unceded territory of the Wabanaki nations, which is the collective name for these 4 tribes today. I want to start by saying the work I'm going to talk about is not mine, and I want to, with gratitude, acknowledge the outstanding work of the team that is doing this. Suzanne Greenlaw is a Maliseet citizen and a PhD candidate at the University of Maine in forestry, and Dr. Michelle Baumfleck, an ethnobotanist who is a research scientist for the Forest Service. These 2 amazing scientists are the leaders of this work, and everything I'm going to say today is in gratitude to their leadership on this, on the work that we're doing here in Acadia. But the work really revolves around the oral history, the ecological knowledge, and the direction and leadership of a group of advisors and gatherers who are doing the work and leading this research. And so I'm going to, hopefully you will hear their voices, and because it's really important for you to hear from them and not hear from me. And I'm going to start with a short video. This is Tanya Mori that you're seeing on the screen right now. You'll see she's Mi'kmaq. You'll see Carol Dana, who's a Penobscot elder, Gabe Frey and Gal Frey, who are Passamaquoddy, Geo Neptune, who's also Passamaquoddy, and Jennifer Neptune, who's Penobscot. So hopefully these videos will play.
Now they call it TEK. Yeah, traditional ecological knowledge. Yeah. I remember when I first heard the term, I'm like, what is this? And then I'm like, oh, that's what we do. It's how we live.
I think I've carried on the harvesting just as part of carrying on those teachings as something that, it's like not just so she learned from her grandmother, but, more than that, it's like it is a lifestyle that goes back generations upon generations. And so it's that keeping the relationship, like, a lot of what we've talked about is the land remembering. And so keeping the relationship with the land, that space, and repeating the same actions that our ancestors did on that same land.
With sweetgrass too, and picking sweetgrass and all those issues around access, and you know, in the park, can we picket, and are we gonna ruin the salt marsh and all these things? Kind of comes back to a different, this worldview that somehow this landscape was a wilderness and it was pristine and humans can't interact with nature in a way that is sustainable and, you know, not damaging. And, you know, it's just not true. Like, this wasn't a wilderness, this was our home. And we've been going to those marshes and harvesting sweetgrass for probably thousands of years. This plant has been so important to us in all kinds of ways. And we have interacted with the marsh and the environment in a way that's sustainable.
I mentioned before how empowering it is to have that validation. And I think that with the onslaught of, yes, let's say, call it the larger society, the dominant society, on every aspect of our lives, including where we have to live. I mean, I grew up knowing that my people were put on 90 acres, and that was the only place we were allowed to have access to live. And it was out on a peninsula as far away from the water as we could possibly get them, put them over there.
Oops, sorry. Come back, yay!
So when you come from that kind of a reality, yeah, I have to go out and sneak my, you know, way into somebody else's property to go for my sweetgrass that I need so I can keep eating. That's really an awful place to be at. And then when you go and say, you know, these scientists want to know what you have, when? Do we really want to give them that information? Because now I'll not have anything left. Because this is what I have. It's a seed that I have. And that's how small I was. My knowledge was a seed that had left. Try to keep it. And then to be able to come along and say, we really want to know what you have and what, how can we help? That's a trusting thing that only comes with time and doing it. And we'll see, even now, we'll see in the end how much access we really do get to the funds. And see what happens with all this work. Major project. Are we going to be able to access any other place what healthy trees are left in 20 years?
There used to be people that could make the sweetgrass sing. And I think that this is one of those things that we'll have to make sure we preserve the tradition of, so that even if people don't do it for a while, you know, for future generations that can hear their ancestors, will still have that information for them. And I think that's a big part of why we're doing this work now.
And here's one more, and then we'll move on. But I hope this is as powerful for you as it is for me every time I hear this.
Sweetgrass is really important in our culture, and it has a lot of different significance. So, you know, it's important to our baskets and the basket makers, but it also has a cultural and spiritual importance where it's used in a lot of our ceremonies. It's burned in prayers, sometimes the way that, you know, people use sage to purify the place. It's usually hung in people's houses or put in your car or in your suitcase to go with you as kind of a protection.
Well, I tried going to a new place in Hogs Bay and they put the dogs on us. And Sandy was with us and she was skiing up. She was pregnant. I was worried about her, but she knew about the dog. She said, don't look at him, keep walking. just keep going. So we made it to the car, and it was one of those big, like a Doberman Pinscher. It was a new place. That was my only bad experience. But I always felt like we had to sneak around in the grass to do it because you didn't want people there. Like this year, we took 7 or 8 people. I did to Addison. We had 2 dogs, and part of me was worried because then you attract attention. Usually it's me and the kids and you're quiet. But that was okay. This guy did come in across the road to his trailer and he glared right at me because I had a bag on my back with the thing over my forehead walking down the road. And another guy went by, said, "Do you have any luck?" I go, "Oh yeah." He doesn't know what I'm talking about. It was funny.
When you go to a place where you want to have that connection and be able to be close to the earth so you can harvest, and you're not allowed to, it's traumatizing. It's extremely traumatizing.
And it's important, you know, to our culture and for passing on, you know, traditions and values and connection to the land and how to pick in ways that protect the grass and the marsh. And if you don't have access, you can't pass that on anymore. And then it's a loss that you can't really put into words. You know, if you have been picking in a location where you went with your grandmother and your great grandmother, and you know, maybe your dad and your grandfather were going there to pick grass to sell to some of the other weavers, and you know that for generations beyond them, they were going there to that same place to pick, and then to have that cut off, and to be told you can't go there anymore because you're hurting the grass is unfair. But you know, it's also just not true. And the sad thing is, you know, places where people don't pick anymore turn into fields, and the grass doesn't do as good. And, you know, it's actually, I think it's damaging for us not to be there. We kind of need each other. Sweetgrasses.
Oops. So I probably don't need to say another thing because you've heard, you know, the meaning of this work and the value of it and what we, you know, are at the table to be able to learn. But I want to just kind of speak a little bit about, you heard of some really important things there. So this work has, as I said, has been led by Suzanne and Michelle, but with this group of advisor gatherers who've been with us from the beginning. And this work started in 2016, and we've been working on it since that time, because it takes time, right, to build trust, and it takes time to shift the, you know, the perceived power imbalances back to where it matters. And with this group, and you know, the work started out as we're going to go run transects, we're going to do plots, we're going to measure the stem counts, and we're going to be able to prove using our typical inventory monitoring process that, you know, we'll test to see, does picking sweetgrass, how does it affect the harvest? And very quickly we learned that process, it doesn't make any sense in this kind of a world, and with people who have the knowledge that these gatherers do. And as you know, Suzanne and Michelle listened and learned, and we had that opportunity, we heard really powerful information about, you know, the variation in practice and the types of knowledge, the location, you know, someone like a gal who can stand on the road and look out and say, this is really good grass for this purpose, and this is great grass for something else. And just to be able to have that learning and gathering of this complex information for this work has been, you know, really a privilege for all of us. You know, this started for us back in 2012. We started doing consultation here. Pat Parker came to Maine and listened to tribal folks around the work to change the regulation to accommodate plant gathering in communities where it wasn't in the enabling legislation. And as most of you know, if you know that 36 CFR 2.6 used to say you can't gather anything in a national park. And so that change in regulation built this beginning of this process to allow us, and I'm using that in quotations, to enter into agreements to allow for, again, you know, the power shift thing here for harvesting and setting up a permitting process. So we started that work, and that's where we ran into this buzzsaw. These people, you know, we shouldn't have to, they should not have to, number one, share their intellectual property knowledge with us, and number two, have to prove that what they know is what they know. And so we're working through that, and then as I said, the journey has been the meaningful way. We're working on some novel approaches to these agreements. As I said, the original intent was to assess the abundance, you know, and then use it to generate that environmental assessment, which is still that requirement Park Service has to start being able to enter into agreements to issue permits. But we, you know, as I said, we quickly learned that there is a better way to do this work, and that's where we are, that journey we're on right now. So what we're trying to do is to kind of build a new model for stewardship. And as I said, I look at what they can do at Grand Portage and what we want to be able to do here, which is very similar. You know, this notion of restoration. We can't land back, and then there's a huge land back movement here in Maine with the tribes and with conservation groups as well. But you know, but we can restore access. We can restore the rights of people to traditional access and use to their homelands. And so that's some of the work we want to do here. We're working on cultural protocols to protect intellectual property, to ensure that whatever information is generated is managed and controlled by the communities. And with Suzanne and Michelle in the lead, this really interesting Indigenous Led Research methodology, where the decisions about the research, the decisions about publications or interpretive media rests with the gatherers and the advisors and the TIPOs in the communities. And, you know, just recognizing, like, who are the experts? Who knows about this? And it's really with people whose connections to land is really long standing. You know, what's important here is that this small salt marsh where people are going to and where this work is focusing, in many ways it's small, 100 acres perhaps, but it's not about this little piece of land. It's about the bigger idea of this work, to restore those connections and access and that we're working on it with this work here. As I said, we're working. The next step is to developing, you know, some formal agreements. We have an annual meeting, and we have an annual meeting coming up next week where Suzanne and Michelle will present a research agenda. People will talk about where they want to go next, you know, give us advice about the work. We will, you know, be working on developing that cultural protocol, which maybe in NPS parlance will be a MOA or a GA, but it really is about who controls knowledge, how it gets decided, and collaborative writing, and how we talk about this and tell the story. Here in the Park Service it's not our story to tell, and so we're still working on some of those pieces as well. It was I think that the significance of this work here, but the work that's going on across the Park Service and in DOI is just, as we know, a breath of amazingly fresh air that, you know, something that the Indigenous people have known for a long time, that Indigenous ecological knowledge is science for federal decision making, and the memo down from the White House and the implementation of that. We were privileged here to been reached out to say, we want to talk about your project here. And the Suzanne and Michelle with the gatherers spent a good deal of time wordsmithing the language of what is it we want to say about the work that we're doing here, and to include this in this White House memo. So that was, wonderful. But what it came down to is harvesting sweetgrass through a Wabanaki philosophy enhances sweetgrass abundance. Wabanaki knowledge and the gatherers who generate this knowledge of leading NPS research and management strategies here at Acadia. And so, as I said, it's been a great privilege to be here where this work is going on. And with that, I want to say thank you and look forward to conversations with folks. And if Suzanne and Michelle, if you're out there, let people know they're in the room.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Remind me again how to get out of here so you can see other people and not just this.
Yeah. Yep. Here we go. Awesome. Thanks so much. And thanks for sharing those really inspirational videos. I know some people might have had some issues with the audio. Hopefully you caught the links in the chat there. And if you didn't get to hear them, I'd encourage you to click on those and watch them at some point. At this point, we have about 10 minutes left, and we're going to open it up to a Q&A panel. If I can have all the presenters turn their cameras back on. And I got a few questions here in the queue. Folks, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the question box there as well. Teri, let's start with you. This question is geared towards some of your work. Let's see. How did you first approach folks to collaborate, knowing the history and current impact of contamination in their communities?
We've been really fortunate in that we've been very, very welcomed in the neighborhood, in the far South Chicago community. The National Park Service being there, quite frankly, is like a beacon of hope for these people. And so reaching out to them has not been difficult. The most difficult part of it was that I started during the middle of a pandemic. I accepted this job about 2 weeks before we shut down and everybody started working from home. So that was the difficult part of it. But once I was able to get out and connect with people, it wasn't hard at all. But I did have to be creative sometimes. And so, for example, like the community, the monument includes a private neighborhood. There's over 4,000 people that live within the boundary of the monument. And so last summer, when the weather was nice, I went out and walked through the neighborhood and went door to door and handed out business cards and brochures and just talked to people, sat on the steps and talked with people about what their concerns were and learned about other community organizations that were working on some of these same issues. And it just, it's just part of being a good neighbor. And that's what we need to do here. We need to be a good neighbor.
Thanks so much, Teri. Bill, a couple questions for you. First one here, how is the park's legislated co-management different from consultation requirements?
That's a great question. It's a deep question. Consultation, under like section 106 or the consultations and stuff we do under NEPA. This is actually, I'll get a great example. I'll just do an example right now, right? At the present moment, we are realigning the county here and the tribe, the band, the RTC, the Reservation Tribal Council. They're realigning a section of road that's going right through the park, which of course we've been working. The park's job is to do and the regional folks' job is to do the compliance on that. Is sort of our primary role there, but in the end, this is a three-way partnership, and so the consultation is. We live within the community. We're constantly just having discussions. Day to day, week to week. The Reservation Tribal Council office is right down the street from us, so it's a lot of heavy informal discussions that are going on all the time. There's a lot of band members that actually do work here for the park as well, and there's back and forth going through that. But I'd say it's a lot of conversation, informal.
And then a follow-up to that one, how is the tribe included in the management decisions? Are they at the table when the park is doing their planning? Is that collaborative too?
Yeah, it's all collaborative. A good example right now is we're working on our long-range interpretive plan, going through that. And it's just again, it's just a lot of, we'll do, we'll get a room at the casino and, kind of thing, and do like a town hall meeting and have discussions that way. But then again, it's just a constant chatter going on between us and the RTC to get that plan worked out and get it ready to go.
Great. A couple more questions here. I want to turn to more the educational side of things. And maybe, Rebecca, we can start with you hearing from what Acadia is doing. What should parks do on their park web pages to be more transparent and communicative regarding environmental justice context or history or issues versus, just kind of having all that content behind the scenes? What can we do?
Start by talking to your tribal communities about what stories about them or what stories need to be told. If you look on our website, we have very little information about this work and some of the other work we're doing. And because, as I said, it's not our story to tell. And so, we want all of this. We want to share this out with folks. It's just that, it takes time to make those decisions. It takes time to have trust be built to share. You heard, Gal Frey saying, it's like this was validation for her, but it was also, she didn't quite trust us. She wasn't ready to tell us, what she knew the beginning of our work. And I now feel like that she's very proud of this project and the work that we're doing. So I think it just takes time, and you have to listen and wait until folks are ready for that to happen.
Teri, Bill, anything to add to that as far as educational materials or what we can put on our websites?
I think each park is going to have a different program. So, you have to be creative and in developing custom materials for your own website. The development process for the web is going to be the same as it is for other interpretive information. But I do agree with Rebecca that you have to be sensitive to the cultural aspect and to the ownership of the story. You really do have to be sensitive to that when it's not the government's job. It's not their story to tell. That is really, really important. The other things that I heard Bill and Rebecca both saying that I totally agree with was about the constant communication and relationship building and building of trust. It takes a lot of energy and it's just never ending, but that is the only way for this kind of work to be successful.
Bill, anything to add?
No, I just want to, what Rebecca was saying, that the sort of issue like the project we have with sweetgrass, that's, really, it's a community issue. It's not something we'd put on our website, but things like school programming, we do, the Grand Portage Van does have a school K through 6, Oshki Maz is what it's called, and we do a lot of environmental learning activities through that, and some of that might go on the website. But yeah, a lot of it's just real informal and discussing like in the Reservation Tribal Council offices, things like that. But yeah, keep it kind of on the down low.
Yeah. One more question, I think that is a good wrap-up question, and then Rebecca Stanfield-McCowan, if you have any closing comments. This question is specific to traditional ecological knowledge. For those of you who are practitioners in park and working collaboratively across lines, Are there any favorite sort of self-study materials, anything that you could encourage others, a good place to learn, podcast to listen to, magazine, any kind of resources that you would encourage people to take a look at and help, introduce these types of topics or expose people to new opportunities to learn? Besides the C2 series here, right, of course.
Well, you heard Tanya Moray say, oh, that's what you call it now, traditional ecological knowledge. So what we always have known is the flavor of the month kind of thing. And so I think there's a lot of consideration in among Indigenous scholars around what it is that they do and how they do their work. I know, as I mentioned, Suzanne is working on her PhD where she's really in some ways framing out what Indigenous research methodologies look like. And I think there's a lot of deep and really powerful thinking going on in this, but I'm not sure if there's some specific thing I could point to. But Suzanne, if you're out there, put something in the chat.
And I might jump in and say there are two resources that take a bigger look at Indigenous environmental justice and Indigenous science that I have been finding really useful. Two books. One is As Long as Grass Grows, that is looking at Indigenous environmental justice and some of the ways it's different from how we traditionally think about environmental justice. And then another one is Fresh Banana Leaves, which is a fairly new book that looks at Indigenous science. So I think that those are great resources to pick up if you have some time, either listen to them or read them.
Thank you.
Cass, do we have any more questions, or do we think we're ready to wrap up?
Yeah, that's the last of our questions there. Rebecca, you are breaking up a little bit, so I think your internet might be a little unstable. But if you want to give any closing comments, and then we can close out the webinar for today. I did want to mention, I just dropped the link to our next webinar in this environmental justice series in the chat as well. We'd love to have you on there. That one, again, is going to be focused on our collaborative initiatives. So think about some of the landscape scale initiatives that might be around you, where groups are coming together, building networks of networks to do this type of work and engaging in environmental justice issues. The link in the chat is there, but it's May 26th at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, and that'll be a moderated panel. Go ahead, Rebecca, if you have any closing comments for today.
Yeah, hopefully my internet will hold out. I just wanted to highlight, a couple of things that we heard in terms of how health intersects with our parks and environmental justice, how we're looking at, we might have legislated or, NEPA requirements for working with groups, but it goes beyond that, so much beyond that, in the relationship building, in the formal and informal ways that we communicate. And then Rebecca talking about restoring access and what does that look like. So a lot of great bits that really show us how expansive the world of environmental justice is when it intersects with national parks, the history, the stories, the cultures that we are here to steward. And so I appreciate all three of you spending some time with us this afternoon. I hope folks found some things that were inspirational, found things that maybe you're like, I'm wondering about that. And we'll come back and join us in a few weeks for the next session.
Yes, huge thanks to all of our presenters. We know you're busy people and we really appreciate your time and sharing today. We'll post the recording soon after the webinar finishes today. And thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.